county school superintendent.
For about 18 years, something like that.
I keep running into patients.
He decided
To work
to do,
on.
yeah, he decided to do that during the Depression. See, when the Depression came along in the 30s, automobile business was really rough. And see, there I was in college.
He was a Studebaker salesman?
No, well, he did that for this was after you stopped being, after he was county school superintendent, he did that. But he was in the Ford business. That's how we happened to go to Monroe, you know, for years. But that business all business was terrible during the Depression, but automobile people just didn't buy automobiles when they could get something that, I mean, you know, they just didn't have the money to do it. But anyway, he decided, somebody came to him, a group came to him and asked him if he would run for county school superintendent. So he gave it a lot of thought, you know, and he thought, well, maybe it might be a good thing to do under all the circumstances, and decided to do it. And then he won it, of course, and then was county school superintendent, I think about 18 years, I believe, was that period.
Well, I've had a lot of patients come into
Right.
the office recently since Barry died.
Right.
And a couple of fellows were bus drivers.
Right, probably so.
And one guy told me that he had applied for the job. Well, Granddaddy called him up and asked him to come down and apply for a bus driver job because one of the fellows was supposed to retire that day, but he just didn't get the papers back. And so the man went down and filled out the application, and Granddaddy told him he had a job, but he just had to wait until 2 p.m. for this guy to show up with the papers that he was resigning. Well, the guy showed up, but he wanted to stay on as a bus driver. And my granddad had to call him back and apologize. But I ran into several people that have spoken very highly of him.
Right.
And of course, when Red Trainer was living, and I went over and talked to Mr. Trainer about some land that he has.
Right.
He got to talking about you and Granddaddy coming over, or maybe when I told you later, you mentioned to me that you and Granddaddy used to come over to collect on the cars at Daddy.
Yeah, I used to come with him. Mason came with him a lot of times. We used to come to Porterdale with him. They sold a lot of cars in Porterdale. And Daddy would come over on Saturdays. And we thought it was terrific. We'd come over with him, and there was a place out there you could get good hot dogs. And we would say, can we get a hot dog? And Daddy would say, yes. You know, so we'd come with him to make those collections. Right.
And those were when he was selling
when
Fords at the time.
Ford business, right.
But then after he
then after he left, was not county school superintendent, he went to work for the Studebaker company. The reason for that, the man who had started the Studebaker business had been Daddy's plant mechanic at the Ford business for years, and he asked Dad to come down and work for him at the Studebaker place. So he did, and that's how.
That's where Desi gets it from.
Right.
that must be. And that was in the late 40s.
Yeah.
In the early 50s.
Right, early 50s, right.
And so Granddaddy was 65 in 53 or 52. Did he retire at that time? When did he actually retire?
Let me see. George, I don't know exactly.
No, because he was still working down at the Studebaker place while Des and I were coming.
Right, right.
In fact, one time, we didn't tell anybody where we were going. And we just left and went down to the Studebaker place.
See, it was down there.
Backwoods.
It was down there on the old Atlanta Highway, you know, right down there on the old Atlanta Highway.
And all of a sudden, we just kind of showed up. And he just kind of looked at us, and said, does your mama know y'all there? Or was your grandmother? Because grandmother was keeping us out there. He said, does your grandmother know you've been here? You know, so he called her and let her know. I think Mother had gotten back by that time, and of course Mother came to get us.
You know, we all used to be up there together. You all would have so much fun together. And I remember I used to, you know, they'd all be outdoors, and we would be in there with, and Mother would say, you were the youngest, of course, and Mother would say, where's George? And your mother would say, that's all, said he's out there, but that's all right, Aunt Katie's out there with him. And I was always out there watching all y'all, you know, running around like Comanche Indians, you know. And don't worry, Aunt Katie's out there, Katie's out there with him. Oh.
Now, how long was he county school superintendent?
About 18 years.
18 years.
I think I'm about right like that.
And then as soon as the war was over, he went out the next, 46?
Yeah, 48, I think.
48.
Went in 30, well maybe it was 16. We went in 1932 because I was at the University of Georgia. And it was either 48, I believe it was 48 or 50. I know it was at least 48 when he went out of his county school.
That's a long time. He was
Well,
But
still-
up until then, he was working with the Ford
Ford
company
Motor Company, right.
until he went to county school. What made him decide to do
I
that?
was just telling George, it was during the Depression, and of course business was terrible, and they were having a rough time, and a group of people in Monroe came to Daddy and said they would wish asked him if he would consider running for school superintendent. They would love to see him do it if he would. So he considered it and decided under all the circumstances to do it. That's the way I've always understood it, just why he left the business. So he's I guess he sold his interest to Mr. McGarrett, was the other man who was in favor of business together.
Oh, he was a co-owner
Yeah,
of the
co-owner,
Ford
right.
dealership.
That's right.
I see.
Now that's my coast. You might say in a way that wasn't good, because after the Depression was over and business had improved, the automobile business, of course, has done so well, and maybe that was a mistake. But anyway, that's the decision he made.
Well, I certainly think
But
that.
Daddy made a good scan school superintendent.
Oh, everybody's
He really
always been, they always
Right.
smile when I bring the fact
he
that,
was a good school superintendent.
I was telling Aunt Katie that I've had several patients from Barry's practice that come over, and they're all a little older, and some of them used to drive buses for Granddaddy, and they just smile when they started talking about those things. And some of them grew up in social circle, and when Granddaddy was county school superintendent, he would come
See,
around and
social
speak to all
schools
them.
in Walton
That's
County
right.
school system.
He'd come around and make speeches or just talk to the kids. And Bob Mitchum, the hospital administrator, grew up there. And
Right.
when I told him who my granddaddy was, he just beamed.
Right.
You know, with a lot of fond memories of all that time. It was really neat.
That's right.
Well, as I told you, when Donald Allen was having his last political career, Donald was in the Georgia legislature for many years as a legislator and then as a senator from the two counties. And when he ran for senator, of course, that's Walton County too, so he was, in that last time he was running, he was talking to somebody in Monroe one day and told him that Donald, since Donald had retired from the courthouse, said he would come into his fund. They were in the fund together. And he came back that day and said, Donald, I want to tell you what somebody said about Catherine's parents today. Said, I ran into this man I was talking to, the new Mr. Williams, and said he just wanted to tell me that he considered the Mason Williams the finest couple he'd ever known.
How about that?
And I just thought, well, that's a wonderful thing to say to somebody, about somebody. But he came back and told Donald that. Of course, Donald said, well, I knew that all the time.
Yeah.
But they were sweet mom and daddy. I'm telling you, they were great. So different, the two of them.
Well, there was a big fire at one of the dealerships.
In Madison.
And so that must have been the Ford dealership
Right,
before
in
y'all
Madison.
moved to
Because he was
Monroe.
there at the Ford dealership before he had the chance to buy into the one in Monroe.
I see. And
That's how we happened to move to Monroe.
Granddaddy literally picked up the safe
Yeah,
and walked out
and
the building.
he thinks his back trouble stemmed from that. That
He picked up the save.
Right.
Sure.
Now why, I don't know, but mostly saves usually, maybe the excitement he thought about, anyway, he got it out, brought it out.
How tall of a man was he when he was
Before he
started?
Well, he wasn't as tall as his father, but he was much taller than he looked in his, when you all knew him, because his back was. And I can remember, Daddy, you see, he was going to, somebody recommended a doctor in Athens, that they thought this doctor, I think one of the doctors in Monroe suggested he go over and see this doctor in Athens that might help his problem with his back. And he used to go over on Sunday. And, Daddy ended up, when I was working in Swainsboro, when I was down there, went down there to work, he got real sick, and that's when he had, hepatitis. But then they called it an inflammation of the liver. And they have always felt that he, of course, picked it up from, they think, a contaminated needle. He got, this doctor tried what kind of shots, I don't know, for his back. Overnight. And they always felt that he maybe got it from contaminated. And that, can't you get that way? That was the only thing they could figure. And of course, that's the thing that ended up killing him,
Yeah. But
After, that many years? That was in 1935.
now what year was it he had his first, when he had his breakdown, that he had to go up?
right after your mother graduated. It was while he was county school superintendent.
He was still county school
Yes, he
superintendent.
was. And Mr. Haskew, who was the city school superintendent of the Monroe Public Schools, with mother's help, he kept the Board of Education agreed if he would do that, they would hold the job for your dad, for your granddad. And see, he was in the hospital for about 8 or 9 months. And so Mr. Haskew would go in the afternoon, and of course mother was in the office, and dad's secretary, not Eulabelle, Annie Bell, family, Dad Monroe, who worked in the county. They were there all the time, but Mr. Haskew would go down half a day and make the decisions that had to be made, and they kept the job. And then that was in because we noticed when your mother was that graduate recital that Daddy didn't seem to be himself exactly. And so then that was in April, I think, when her recital took place, and then of course she graduated in May. And then that early summer, because it was about the time, I remember, I was up there at the time, because Sarah Stevenson was born in the latter part of April, and that's when Dad was in the hospital. We took him up to Dr. Tom Atkins in Atlanta.
What was it that made you?
Well, he just wasn't himself. He was quiet, you know, and looking back on it now, he had difficulty sleeping, you know, and Daddy never had problems that way. And he let me see if I can think of something. In other words, Daddy was not our daddy. He just, you know, he just he was not himself. You know.
What was the actual diagnosis they gave you?
Let's see. What did they thought it at the time, as it turned out, he was at Emory Hospital for about 10 days.
I remember going there.
Yeah,
Well, this is before that.
Yeah,
This
these were.
This is back in 40s. Yeah,
right.
okay.
But that's when he was in the hospital. I mean, that's when he went up to Emory. No, that's when he went up to Emory.
Oh, the second time?
The first time that he went in, they made all these tests to try to determine what it was, and Dr. Atkins finally just said, well, now this is a mental problem. And they felt like it was, and of course then Dr. Atkins recommended Blessing, that wonderful hospital, I guess it's still going strong, Shepherd Pratt in Baltimore. And that's where he was for about 9 months.
Granddaddy went up there?
Went up there. And it's hard to get in, but Dr. Atkins got in because they had a long waiting list. But it was just wonderful, the treatment that he got.
Almost as if it was a depression as well.
Well, it was. That's what it was. And although we never saw, they ended up, I think, diagnosing it as a sort of manic depression, and yet we don't ever remember any particularly manic stage. It was just always a depression stage. And the doctor, yes, the doctor now Donald went up with Mason. Donald went up with Mason to take Daddy up there, and I stayed with Nanny. When we went and got him, I went up there, and I remember talking to the doctor that he was so close to, and they became fast friends, and they communicated a long time after Daddy came back home. They communicated by letter. He was so interested in Daddy's case and admired him, so he wrote Mother the nicest letters. And I remember the letter, Mother called us one day, because Nanny was still living, and she was there with Mother. She called, she said, guess what? I have this wonderful letter from your daddy today that he wrote, and he said, Kate, I've just waked up in Shepherd Pratt Hospital, and all that period was just a blank. You know? Wow. Just a blank to him. And which was a blessing. I mean, he just said, I've just waked up in Shepherd Pratt, and he sat down and wrote a long letter, you know.
He couldn't figure out what he was doing.
No, he just, of course, then he knew, but I mean, knew he was ill and everything, But that's what they finally, I think, decided as doctor. But I remember the doctor, I'm trying to think of his name. Maybe Donald would remember. Oh, I was so impressed with that doctor. He was not much younger, or close to Daddy's age. They were congenial, and
Just wonder what they treated him with back then.
But one thing, they did give him some shock treatments. But now, what kind of shock treatments? They weren't electric shock treatments, so some of them, they had to write and get permission from all of us to do it. I know they did that. Mother gave her permission, and I think they asked us as children to sign. I believe I remember doing something like that.
And Mother,
But I remember calling Dr. Atkinson, talking to him about it. He said, by all means do it. You know, that this is what they recommend do it, because that's a wonderful place.
when Mother graduated from college, and then all this took place, did she move on down to Swainsboro during that time?
Let's see. She went that fall, right?
Okay.
She
Yeah,
went
right
that-
on down.
right. She came down there, went down and had the interview, I remember, and stayed. I know she stayed with Sally and George. Sally and George had married, and that's when she met your daddy. And that was the first time she went. That first weekend for the interview or something, they asked your dad to have a blind date. He didn't do it that time. You remember? And she kidded him about that.
Oh, he wouldn't go out
He
with
wouldn't go out with her that first time.
She went out with, who was she went out with? She went out with somebody else.
With Mr. Robert Humphreys,
Yeah.
half brother. Right.
Gordon Fan.
Gordon
she
Fan.
went with
Gordon Fan.
Gordon Fan. But anyway,
Oh, Lord.
but you know what I'm trying to remember, the doctor said to me in his office when we were talking to him about that Shepherd Frank. I went when we brought Daddy home. He said, this is almost sort of like a change of life depression. I remember he used that expression to me.
Well, the reason I was thinking that is because there's his last child graduating from college.
Right.
And then,
Right.
what do you do now? And a lot of people go through an empty nest syndrome.
Well, as he said, sort of a change of life. He
Just
used that
delay.
expression to me. He said, sort of change of life depression. And see, Aunt Maida had some difficulty too. At about the same period of life. She did too, but she came out all right. But that was when our grandfather came to live with us, was when she was having that problem.
And he didn't have the problem again until when, 65? Or,
Yeah,
or
just
no,
before.
Just before Mother got sick.
Right.
No, it must have been before that, because she came down and stayed with us.
And that's when your daddy, he was in your hospital, your daddy, they helped him a lot there in Swingsburg.
I remember I took some potholes down there.
How long did he stay in Milledgeville?
Not long.
It wasn't long, his
Not
mother
long,
got
about 2 or 3
y'all got
months.
so upset with him.
Right, we didn't like what they were doing, so your mother and I we met at Milledgeville and y'all brought home.
Yeah, I remember going there with her one time.
And we did that on the, thinking it was the wise thing to do,
Well, things were a lot different
Yeah,
back then.
right.
That type of care's come a long way since.
But his staying down there in Swainsboro, so he was right there with those nurses. They just looked after him.
I know.
Golly, because he was down there in that room on the end.
Sure
And
was.
of course, there was somebody right there all the time, and they just fell in love with him. And all the nurses just looked after him real close.
That was such fun. That's why the total personality Daddy had, when those changes occurred, we all noticed it because it was just not Daddy. When he was so quiet, didn't enter into conversation, and would come in the house. He was still working every day, but he would just come in and sometimes go back to himself, and just stay to himself.
He was he had his room back there in the next to the
Right.
last room in the house, and he always had WSB radio back there. And I can remember when we'd go up and spend a few days with him, that it was really neat to go back there and listen to the radio. I don't remember if he had a TV in that room or not.
He had a
he
TV
did,
back
a little
there.
box TV.
Box TV, one of the old box TV. And some of the figures weren't exactly right sometimes.
Oh, yeah. In
They
fact,
had
sometimes you'd get,
short legs, right.
they'd get the picture would
Right.
flat. But it didn't really make any difference when we get back there anyway. But now, when y'all, who stayed in that back bedroom when y'all were growing up? Did he?
Of course, that was just an extra room when we were growing up. But when my grandfather came to live, that's why his bed, that's why he stayed.
In that back room.
Back in that back bedroom. It was small, but it.
And where did you and Uncle Mason stay? Or you and Mother stayed in the front room?
No,
Your mother,
I stayed in the middle bedroom.
Uh-huh.
And then Leela did, but a lot of times Leela was with Mother. Leela and Mother, of course Leela and I called the time, but Daddy was very restless in the bed, and Mother just could not sleep in the bed with Daddy, in I mean, when we were grown and, you know, mother couldn't sleep, so that's why he had his own, you know, bed, slept back there. But, and then when Nanny came, you know, Nanny lived with us for about 10 years.
Where did she stay?
And she stayed in family, we shared.
And that was the front room or the
That
middle
was
room?
the middle room. Mother and Leela were in the front room.
Where did Uncle Mason stay?
Let me see, there were 2 beds back in where Daddy was. That was really Mason's room, but until Daddy, and then Daddy joined him, see, but they put an extra bed back there, but they had 2 beds back there at one time. Because those are big, good sized bedrooms.
I remember that old bed he had was the softest. I mean, it just.
Right, like that.
I wouldn't be able to sleep on that thing.
I know. And were you the one that cracked your collarbone?
That was Des.
That was at Des, that's
Des.
right.
Fell down those stairs.
And
I'm the one that burned Lee with the poker.
Right. And listen, when Des fell down, you go holler at this, I'd have to tell you this. But one of those first nights when Des broke his collarbone and fell down those basement steps, of course, it hurt him to move, you know. The doctor did whatever you're supposed to do to it and everything, but he was he was sleeping back there in that room with Dad, and he had to get up and want to go to the bathroom, and of course it hurt him when he'd have to move like that. And you know what Daddy told him that first night? He said, "Dad's just cut loose where you are."
I can see him doing that.
Because Mother didn't know until the next day, but Daddy told him, so Dad's cut loose where you are. Because it hurt him to move, you know, every move he made hurt those that collar. I remember from my broken shoulder, all those things are painful.
I think when that happened, Mother was nursing me on the sofa. And when Des fell down the steps.
Right.
And she just threw me down right there and just took off, you know, and forgot all about me.
Studied your growth,
So
right?
she came back and I was standing there playing with my toes, having a big time when she finally remembered me and came back to where I was.
You know, when you remember the swimming pool was down there, you know.
Did Mother?
In Monroe Bay, Dad used to take y'all down to the swimming pool. It's down off the old Atlanta Highway, right across from near where the Studebaker place was, you know. Well, Daddy used to take you all down there, you know. Of course, Daddy, as you know, was a big scout of all those years and knew what to do with, you know, young people always.
He got the Silver Beaver Award.
Yes, he did, right. Okay. And anyway, one day Mr. John Aycock, who lived above us up there, was a real good friend, had a department store there in Monroe, Aycock. So he and Daddy were real good friends. He stopped by Mother and I were out in the yard one day, and he said, "Kate, I've just been down there by that swimming pool, and that white head is out there in the middle of the pool with all this bunch of children around him."
Oh, we would just crawl all over
right.
him. And he'd just fight with us out in the middle of the pool,
right,
pick us up and throw us.
Right.
I remember that.
See, Daddy used to, you know what he used to do as a scout leader in Monroe? He used to take the Boy Scouts up to the old, what they call the old apple orchard. It was up on Lake, I think it was Lake Raven. It was, I can't remember, one of those lakes up there. One of those lakes. I've been to the spot, but they camped out.
I didn't want her to come back.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway, they would stay up there for about 3 weeks every summer. And it was they had to move everything, take everything, food. Mother and Aunt Mater went a number of times because he would always take A.G. and Julian along with the Boy Scouts in Monroe. And because this was before my brother Mason was old enough really to be a Boy Scout, and they didn't have the Cub Scout program then. But he took Mason and A.G. and Albert Foster, in Monroe, who was not Foster, Albert Mobley, who was A.G.'s cousin on the other side, who lived in Monroe. A.G.'s, one of the Fosters, Marilyn Mobley, in Monroe.
That's Sally's?
Kid of Sally. He was Sally's cousin. And Sally, the Coleman was not Albert, Coleman Mobley. Coleman and A.G. and Mason would be the 3 little boys going with the older Boy Scouts. And they had such fun, you know, going over there. And of course he had real strict rules for A.G. and Mason and Coleman because they were younger, you know. But Mother they planned the meals and they would did all that. They did that several summers. Daddy
How about
took them up there.
And take about 3 weeks.
3 weeks, right, at a time. And during that period, I was at Juliet Lowe, Camp Juliet Lowe up at Claflin, which is a Girl Scout camp, you know, so I did that every summer when they were, Daddy didn't have to worry about me. And I think Leela, she was too little, so she stayed with Nanny. She would go stay with Nanny when they'd take these campers up.
Where was Nanny? Where was Nanny?
They lived in Stone Mountain, I mean not Stone Mountain, Kirkwood, which is, you know, part of, Kirkwood was at that time a really nice suburb. It's out, a little southeast of Decatur. It's in that area, DeKalb County, right? And all that's changed now, but it was such a nice town then, a nice suburb of Atlanta. Oh, you rode, I loved going up that, riding the big streetcar into Atlanta, downtown Atlanta, you know, with Nanny. Oh, I just thought that was terrific to ride that fast car, Stone Mountain car, going in, ride the Stone Mountain car, you know, riding to Atlanta. But anyway, that's where Lily would stay with her while they were camping. But Daddy did that for several summers. And I don't know anybody else in Monroe that's ever done it. Because they always called the achievement of the roads were terrible in the mountains then. They'd call, if you get over the gap, you were all right. They'd have to get over the gap to get to the lake and get over to the Apple Orchard. Yeah, you know, my brother Mason took John, and Robert was a little bitty up there. He just got homesick and took him up there and camped out on that old apple orchard one time not many years ago.
How about
Just to see it again, to show it to them, what fun that. And see, it came down to an apple orchard, and then it went right up the mountain. You know, you go up the mountain, there was a creek where they had the water and everything coming down into the lake. And you've heard the story about the wildcat, haven't you?
No, ma'am.
Well, yeah, that story.
I do, because I've heard it, but I can't even remember.
Well, Daddy had given the
Mason always
boys
told me.
that were doing all these activities with his guys, and Coach Mason and A.G. and Coleman, see, had strict rules about where they should go and not leave camp and all this. So one day, like little boys will, they decided they were going to leave camp. They wanted to go up the creek by themselves. So they did. Well, it turns out that either one of the Boy Scouts saw them disappear up the thing, and they came and told Daddy that the boys, you know, had gone, and of course they weren't supposed to leave camp and by themselves. And so Daddy decided he'd better teach them a lesson. So he followed them very slowly, and of course they had gotten a good start, and they were climbing. Part of the time they'd be in the creek, and part of the time on the side, on the rocks, and going up. Daddy said you could hear them talking, and Coleman, Mobley, Sally's cousin, was a very blustery look type of child, and you could hear him talking. If he were way back there in those woods, you could hear him, you know, talking. And A.G. Mason, my brother, was always very agile. He was the one leading, and A.G. would always be the last one back here saying, "Wait for me!" You know, they always ahead of him. He was fat and big, and he just wasn't. He was not athletic at all. But boy, could he play the piano. That's another story. He could so musical, but his daddy didn't want him to be a musician, and that was frustrating. So he inherited all that, and then didn't get to pursue it much, except what he did on his own. But anyway, Daddy was following him, and he said he'd get so tickled going because he could hear him. So finally, he decided he'd better get, if he could. What I do, just let this hold?
No, ma'am, you go ahead.
But anyway, he decided to maybe try to get ahead of them up the way. So he said practically ran up the mountain. He went way around and got ahead of them. They were plugging along, you know, and got way up there and got behind a real big tree. See, they had told the boys that the mountains had wildcats and things, you know, just like that. And so that was one of the things that they were to watch out about. And one of the reasons they didn't want them to leave by themselves, you know. So he went way around and got ahead of them and got behind this big tree. And then he said, he let out this wildcat yell. And
Something Mason used to do that.
yeah,
saying,
right. And Daddy, and I've heard Mason say years later that undoubtedly he would never forget that sound as long as he lived. much like a wildcat as he could ever imagine. Well, Daddy was what Daddy was. He rushed around, got in the head of him, and gotten up there, and let out that wildcat yell. Well, Daddy said for a few seconds there was complete silence, just silence, no sound from any of them. And then I think it was Mason that said, "Wildcat!" and turned around and said, Coleman literally said, Coleman Mobley fell, I don't know how many times, getting down that creek. And Mason was leading the way, and Coleman was falling everywhere, and A.G. was with the tail of Coleman saying, "Wait for me." And they could not get down that creek fast enough, and when they got down to camp, see, that was when Mason, he wasn't Boy Scout age, so he was 9 or 10. I don't know how old he was, about my mom's age or maybe a little older. And they were soaking wet. They shoot everything they had on. They'd fallen so many times in the creek, running and falling over things and leaving and hollering, "Wildcat!" You know, they came into camp telling this story about the, being up the creek in the wildcat. Do you know, Daddy he didn't have any more trouble with them. They never did leave camp again. And do you know, they did not know that, the true facts of that until they were college age.
How about that?
He just kept.
One day, A.G. and Julian A.G. was at our house, and it came up, and Daddy let the cat out of the bag. He didn't mean to, but he did, and they both looked at each other. And A.G. says, "Uncle Mason, do you mean to tell me all these years I thought that was a wildcat?"
Oh, God.
And that's the truth. That's the way that happened. But he didn't have any more trouble with it. Daddy knew he was good at. For instance, but this was before we moved from Madison. I was what, 7 when we moved, because it was 1920. Well, A.G. was Mason's age, and we were just 18 months apart. I'm just 18 months older than Mason. Well, A.G. and Julian is 2 years older than I am. But they were little boys, of course. And one day, I made a call to Daddy down at the Ford place, where Daddy was, and he said, "Mason, so-and-so, somebody in Madison," he told her that they'd just seen Julian behind the store in Madison with this other little boy just puffing away on a cigar or cigarette or something. And she said, "Now I can call Albert and tell him," but says, "You know how Albert is. See, he'd get mad as hops right now, but then in 2 minutes he forgets about it, and I want him." Julian taught a lesson about this. So Daddy says, "All right." She says, "Will you handle it for me?" So Daddy left the Ford place, went around to where this man had seen Julian. Sure enough, that's that Julian. How old he was, 9, 8, whatever, sitting there, puffing away. So Daddy stopped him. He said, "Well, now, Julian, come on now, I'm going to take you home. You know you ought not to be doing it. I'm going to take you home." So they took him to the house right where I was telling you, across to the school, and there was a swing on that porch. In the meantime, Daddy stopped and bought the cheapest cigars he could find, the cheapest cigar he could find on the way home. Took him home and said, "Now we're going to sit here, and you seem to want to smoke. We're going to sit here, and you're going to do it in front of me. You're going to just have a good time. I want you to get this out of your system." So he sat Julian down in the swing and lit the cigar and began swinging, with Julian.
Ooh.
Well, in a little bit, Daddy could see he was getting green around his ears, Anyway, he got just deathly sick. And Julian told me years later, he said, "Uncle Mason is the reason I have never smoked a cigarette. I've never smoked since that day."
That's like
swinging and that swing.
That's like Aunt Lee. When Aunt Lee was at college, Linda told me this story. Aunt Lee was at college and all her friends smoked. All her friends. Come on, Lee, you got to smoke. This is just for a big test, day before big test.
As if you needed it.
And Aunt Lee said, "Okay, I'll smoke." She got the sickest she's ever been in her life. Stayed up all night. She was so sick, and had to go take that test the next morning and failed it. And I don't think she smoked. So
That's right. But Julian, he never did smoke either. But he said, I never smoked from that day to this.
Well, how did Granddaddy get into working with the scouts? Did somebody come and ask him, or did he just?
No, just interested in young people all his life, working with young people. No, he just did it. You know. Of course, the scout, those were when the scout programs were first getting going, you know, and of course they wanted people who were willing to give the time and effort. And as I don't know whether you all remember reading when Daddy died, the wonderful editorial that Sanders Camp wrote in the, did you all remember, ever get a copy of that? I imagine Leela had it somewhere.
Probably she did, but I
I bet, well, it was a beautiful editorial, and Sanders Camp, who was the editor at that time, was the
Walton
Tribune, was one of those scouts that Daddy, you know, took to all those places. He was a little older than I was. And he was one of those boys, and he wrote the most beautiful editorial about that, and not only talked about his scout work and work, but about the tennis court and how great he was about, you know, asking and getting all the young people to play tennis up there and doing things, you know, if they fun together and everything. But that was the sort of thing he was talking about, how much Mr. Mason had meant in his life,
I remember we got a picture somewhere of him, and it was a lot earlier than, it was in the 20s. Seemed like it was in the early 20s. And I forgot where, but he was in his scout uniform. It was him and some other.
Well, I remember that from being just a little bit of the scout work.
You all have any pictures of when they used to go up to the apple orchard?
I'm sure there's some. Mother used to have them in that, when A.G. and Julian used to come over, Mother had a big.
You're not running that thing still?
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
sir.
You mean it's going right now still? This thing is gonna wear them out.
They always kept going.
Daddy watched over and over
Oh, right.
till he memorized everything he said.
And they can also run something else over it and
Right.
blot it all out.
But anyway, no, I can, you know, that's one of my earliest memories of Daddy's working with me.
One thing, advantage Catherine has, none of you can contradict him.
No.
Now,
I hold my
the
memory.
only thing is I can maybe remember how she told it last time. But she tells it pretty straight. I don't detect any
I'm saying,
deviation.
I don't know any other way to tell it, right?
I remember one time I got real tickled. I had driven Mother up to y'all's house. It was you and Mother and Grandmother. Y'all were just getting together for something, and I just happened to be there. I was the left shoe.
And you remember you were down at Jacob with us that time. When Mother
This
had
was
the
your house, though.
Right,
We were eating lunch with you.
Uh-huh.
And all three of them, I was sitting there, and at one particular time in the moment in the conversation, all three of them were going at one time. And I got so amused, I just started laughing, and they all looked at me. And then they realized what I was laughing at.
Right.
And they all started laughing too, but that was a scream. And poor Grandmother, she would try to, because it's you and Mother talking,
Yeah.
and she was trying to get into it. She couldn't get in.
And what we were talking about when you left, what was I saying?
Talking about the,
You're talking about the letter, the editorial.
Oh, yeah, what a beautiful
Sanders
letter
Camp
Sanders Camp wrote and said how much, you know, Daddy had meant and that Granddaddy was, that Mason Williams was truly a great man. Talking about, he said not only was work with young people, the scouts and so forth, but having the young people flock up to his home and play tennis. On Sunday afternoon at our house when we were growing up, now we'd take turns all playing sets of tennis, and there'd be worlds of people sitting in the chairs and banks there, you know, watching. It was just a fun thing all the time.
Now it's in,
The grandmother make lemonade.
There's no
for the whole
telling.
tribe.
There's no telling how much lemonade Mother made.
Those were the days when you had to make lemonade. You
Had to
couldn't
squeeze
get it
the
out.
lemons, right.
Get powder
You couldn't
and
get
make imitation lemonade.
That powder stuff isn't that good
well,
anymore.
Granddaddy played tennis until he was about 65.
Yes, he did, right. And could beat them all. Do you know when he died, Arthur Mobley, Sally's brother, came up to me and said, Catherine, I'd give anything in the world to play another set of tennis with your daddy. Daddy could beat them all, and even with that bad back, and the way he did it was placing the balls.
He'd run them to death.
He'd run them to death. And he'd run them till their tongues would hang out, you know, he could beat them.
defense.
Right. Defense, get him to defense. And he just said, I just give anything. I said, well, I think that's one of the nicest things anybody ever said. He said, I wish I could play one more set of tennis with you.
And he died in November of 65?
July.
July of 65.
July of 65.
Now, Mr. Camp, was he related to the camp that had the newspaper in Swainsboro?
He had the newspaper in Monroe.
I know there was a camp that started the newspaper in Swainsboro.
I don't think
I don't believe
so.
so. I don't believe so. But I tell you what Bob Stevens did with that editorial.
He published in
He had it.
Congressional Record.
He had it inserted and published in the Congressional Record in Washington. He thought it was beautiful. It was a beautifully written editorial. And it's Nita, my sweet friend Nita Sams, who worked at the Tribune then at that time, said, Katie, Sanders rarely ever writes an editorial at anybody's death, but he said when your daddy died, that was one editorial he was going to write.
Did, where the Thompsons, where are they buried? Raymond and them, are they buried in Madison?
In Social Circle.
In Social
Sam
Circle.
and B-Pop are buried in Social
But
Circle.
there's two people on the whole lot.
And Mother had just assumed that she and Daddy would be buried there too, because that is the Thompson lot with nobody on it, but now her brother's lot is, Nanny's brother's lot is next to hers, but Nanny B-Papa's lot is that. And one day Daddy just walked in and announced to her that he had bought the lot, you know, out where they're buried. Without, he didn't even consult her. He just said, Kate, I bought a lot out at the new cemetery in Monroe. And she said, well, Mason, I thought we were going to be buried. He said, well, I never have lived in Social Circle, and I just didn't want to be buried in Social Circle. So that was that.
Why is it called Social Circle?
That's the name of the town.
That's the name of the town?
It's right down here, but just 10 miles away. It's an old town and a lovely old town. Right.
Probably the Social Circle of
You just thought they were making that up, didn't you? You didn't realize that.
No, I mean, I just thought it was the name
And you
of
know the house,
cemetery.
see,
No,
Nanny lived there, you know, as a little girl.
In Social Circle?
In Social Circle. That house, we have a picture of her taken when she was 10 years old, standing on the front porch of that house on the main
Really?
street in Social Circle.
You got that?
It's somewhere, now, I don't know which one of us has it, but we've got it somewhere. She was 10 years old. It's a, an old-timey looking picture, right. And her father was in business in Social
Her
Circle.
father, after the Civil War, he was in Social Circle, and he opened up a little business to help people. Nobody had any money, anything to do, and he was making mops out of corn shucks.
To help.
Take a piece of, I guess, a block of wood with holes bored in and set corn shucks in there for the bristles to scrub the floor with, and employed a number of people to make these corn shuck mops. That's what Nanny told me, so I guess it's true.
That was in Social Circle?
Right.
In Social
That's what it is.
And they went to the Methodist church there in Social
Right.
Circle.
I'm quite sure.
And they grew up, or their home was right across from the Civic Center now. They must have just walked down to that Methodist church just down the street.
But that one burned.
And then when did they move there?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I was thinking of Madison.
Well, Nanny was 10, she told me, when
They lived
this
in Social
picture was taken. And they lived there a number of years, and that's where Jack Hickey was born. Jack Hickey, and,
You know who Jack
Daniel
Hickey is?
Whitehead Hickey, the poet,
Daniel
was born.
Whitehead Hickey.
was born there in Social Circle. In fact, the house in which he was born it's not on the main street, but just not even a block off, is it now? It's to the right.
That's on
And
the
they
top.
call it the poet's house. They call it the poet's house. Right.
What was her sister's name? Jack's mother.
Oh, Bessie. Bessie. She
So
was
wait a minute,
Bessie.
it was Nanny's daddy that was doing the mops?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Oh, okay, so Nanny grew up there, and then when she married Raymond Thompson, they lived in Madison.
Right there. Yeah, they lived in
But
Madison.
Nanny grew up,
They
And
didn't
she was
live in
well,
Madison.
part of the time, she lived part of the time in Social Circle and then part of the time in Gainesville. He went back to Gainesville.
and who was her daddy? Nanny's daddy was?
Whitehead. I think it's
You know,
Charles.
Charles
I believe.
Whitehead.
And that's a relationship with Daniel Whitehead Hickey.
Right. Daniel Whitehead Hickey was Nanny's nephew. He was the son of her only sister.
So Lila Whitehead was, her husband was
Charles.
Charles.
I think I'm right about the Charles. I'll have to,
Lila Whitehead.
Whitehead's
No, it
daddy.
was Uncle Charlie. Wait a minute.
Charles
It was
Whitehead.
not
Her
Charles
husband was
Whitehead.
John
Raymond Thompson.
Raymond
Her
Thompson.
husband was Thompson, John Raymond Thompson. That's
Now,
John
who was-
Thompson's
Who
name.
was Nanny's sister?
She was Bessie. Bessie Hickey.
Bessie Hickey.
Hickey, that's
She
Jack
married-
Hickey's mother. She
Okay.
married
Bessie Whitehead.
Daniel Hickey he was from Louisiana. Now, where Aunt Bessie met, and they lived in Memphis for years. Because my mother visited them when she was in Memphis. I mean, when they lived in Memphis. And now, where Aunt Bessie met Uncle Dan, I do not know.
Didn't they own some property down in Baton Rouge,
Right.
Louisiana, and they gave the land where the state capitol
Was built in
and it was
Louisiana.
supposed, if they ever ceased to use it as a capital, it was supposed to revert back to the Hickey family, but somehow or another the deed got lost or something, and when they never did get the land back.
Listen, we've stayed, I felt like we kept y'all from doing something else you wanted to do.
No.
Oh, all right, we better head
No,
up.
this
This sure
is-
has been fun.
Oh, it has. I just learned, first I
Fun to
learned
see
more
you.
now
And
than
you
I have in
just
40 years.
Huh?
Learned more today than I have in 40 years.
You know, when you get our age, sometimes you can't remember something.
And you think about it a little bit and then it comes to
and
you.
you try to remember somebody's name, and it doesn't always come.
Exactly when you want it to come. That's one of the things.
You
Well,
get
I'm in
ready to
trouble
tell
now.
something,
What am I gonna do later?
you get ready to tell something, and you gotta know, figure that you recall the names involved, because you may get there and come up and you can't tell it, and then hit the punchline, you can't say it.
Yeah, this morning I was looking around, I couldn't find my glasses. And I couldn't remember what
Where
they were.
you left
I said to Lane, where are my glasses? I said, I had them. I mean, here's the case. I had the case, no glasses in them, you know, and I couldn't remember. I never had the two apart. She said, Lane says, well, you were wearing that Jack shirt last night when you came in. Why don't you look in there? And I walk over there and look in the closet. There they are in the pocket. She
Well,
said,
listen.
what will you do without me?
Let me tell you a good one on me once. I was looking, this was before, I don't have a little chain now because I wear my glasses all the time, but this was when I was wearing my glasses all the time. And before I had a little chain around my neck and I would take them off, you know, and put, and one day I went all over the house looking for my glasses. I was desperate. I just looked everywhere and you know where it was?
It was stuck
Right
up
up there.
You know, several days, about a week or 10 days
I looked in
ago,
the mirror, went by a mirror, and there they were. I could see them up there. So stupid.
Catherine and I were trying to think of this classmate of hers named Milton Richardson, who she was telling you all about a while ago. And we could remember that he ended up as an Episcopal bishop. He died of cancer out in Texas, but we couldn't come up with his name. So when Catherine was telling us you all about being in this government class, and I knew she was going to need to come up with Milton Richardson's name. And it had come to me, and I said, well, when she hits that and can't remember his name, I can supply Milton, but she just had Milton
It just came to me, see, the other day, I couldn't think of it at all. You know, it's ridiculous. Listen, one night,
Just kind of spoils things
one
for you.
night we were trying to think of, he was trying to think of a boy's name that he'd known at Davidson years ago. And he couldn't remember the name, and he tried it all day long. And that night, after we'd gone to bed, all of a sudden, the name wasn't Gillette. I can't remember now what it was, but he did have a real good friend named Gillette. All of a sudden, Don just raised up in bed and said, Gillette! just came to it like that. That's one thing about this age.
It's that way. One of these days, you all know what we're talking about.
Listen, we gotta go.
Well, the one thing, that when we were at Sally's party, we ran into a lot of people
Right.
that you had grown up
Oh,
with.
yes, and a lot of them in Georgia. We've known together in Georgia, too.
But one of them was a lady that used to live next door to you,
No,
a Mrs. Butts.
She wasn't.
no,
Or
she
none.
wasn't that. None.
She a nun.
She was a nun.
The Buttses were on the other thing.
Yeah,
other side.
but Bud Sams is on the other side. We
Okay.
grew up, all three of us, right next door.
This was this tall lady who
This was
had
a
these
tall
combs.
lady, right,
She never had combs.
whose hair always looks like it needs combing. All her life it's been that way.
Well, that's
right.
Miss Nunn.
Right, she's
She was.
Mrs. Williamson now, but she was a nunley.
She was married
Miss
to
Harry.
Roberts, and he died, and now she's married to a Williamson.
Her boys were pallbearers at that, you know, at Daddy's funeral, remember? But, yeah, she grew up right next door, Noxie.
Knox and Nunn, Roberts,
Okay.
Williamson.
She's Bill, Jim, her husband, her lifelong sweetheart, the father of her three boys, died, had a heart attack on the street in Atlanta a number of years ago and died. And then several years later, she married this retired naval officer, Captain David Williamson, and they've had several happy years together, and I'm real happy for them.
You know the name of this creek down here?
This one right down here?
Yeah. Williamson Creek.
Williamson Creek.
Right.
And you told me, you
They
named it
named after
yourself.
John Williamson, who had the first land grants to this property.
Okay, that's That's right.
There, were you the first owner of this property?
No. John Williamson got
I mean,
it back in
not-
18,
Not the first owner,
Adam and
but
Eve Smith, well, you know, they
But we own,
John
yeah,
Stevenson.
but you know there was a man named
we own
Adam
this
Smith.
though, right.
Very famous man, wrote Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith.
Well, she was so thrilled to see you, and she said, oh, maybe I've got to find me a new doctor, she said. I said, well, just come to Covington.
That's right.
She lives out on Habersham Road, she has a real pretty house out on Habersham Road.
Well, the Studebaker that Granddaddy used to own, the one with the single headlights and the big round thing,
Right, unusual.
did he like that car? Was it a pretty dependable car?
He loved it,
Yeah.
I think he did.
Well, I saw one over, when Don and I went to the beach this past summer, we went through Louisville, and we went a back way, and I saw one sitting in an old barn over there. I thought I'd go back and see if I could buy it from him.
You know,
Fix
we
it up.
bought a Studebaker from him.
We got one, had one.
It had a passing gear on it, but the thing never would work. And when we would go from here to Atlanta, there wasn't but one stretch between here and Atlanta where we could pass a
That
car.
was before the interstate, of course.
It was up near around Conyers, and it was about a half a mile stretch, straight road that you could see, because you couldn't zoom around anybody. You just could creep up on them, and usually by the time you crept up on the fellow, you'd meet somebody, you know.
Oh,
Yeah, the Studebaker was a pretty good car.
It was a right good
We
car.
had it, but we
But
had ours.
right after the war, they came out with this car. It was
Was
too
advanced in
advanced
style,
for the
see.
style. And of course, today it would be, it wouldn't be that way at all. But they were used to having the standard old cars. Everybody looked like. You used to say about Chevrolet, said you could have any color you wanted, just so long as it was black. You never saw a red car.
Are there any relatives buried in Madison?
Oh,
Uncle Albert.
Uncle Abbott and Aunt May.
They buried there.
Right. And Lord, where was Judy buried? Do you know him?
I don't know. Junior?
Uh-huh.
They cremated him.
I know,
think.
that's right. He was
That's right, they
cremated.
did. I remember Mother telling me about
He was
that.
cremated.
do they still put a marker even if they are cremated?
Sometimes they
Sometimes
do.
people do,
I
depends on
had
what they decide to do with the.
I had a cousin and his wife. They both were cremated, and they scattered their ashes over the inland waterway down around Palm Beach.
Uncle, John Evan Martin and his wife were scattered over the water.
Now this cousin of
I
mine,
was
out in
on that
Texas,
myself.
John Edward's brother, preacher, out in Texas. His wife died, and he brought her remains over here in a little casket, and we took him up to. He and I went out to the old family cemetery out there, and we dug a hole and put her away.
Is that right?
And that's where he wants to be when he wants to be cremated and put
Yeah,
out that Hopewell. It's
he-
the old Martin cemetery lot out at Hopewell Presbyterian out in the western part of Canada. That's where Donald's grandfather Martin was the minister for many, many years.
How about that? But the Thompsons are over in Madison. They've got a burial plot over there.
Yeah,
Or
social
social
I mean,
circle.
social
Social
circle,
circle.
right.
I told
Oh.
Catherine if I was allowed to have a field up over here in Canada, I'd just soon be buried over there.
See, the Stevenson lot is,
Over there, it's her grandmother's lot, and nobody there.
nobody's
There's
on
two
it. It's a
people
big lot and nobody's on it except
bigger than this
90 people.
room.
Because see, Uncle Fred, when he lost his little girl in Monroe, they had to buy a lot. And so their lot, Uncle Fred Thompson, his family probably would have been buried there too. But you see, his family, he lost little, who made the first flag?
I don't remember.
Betsy Ross was her name, Betsy Ross. She was just 2, she had meningitis. And Precious looked like a little angel. Darling little blonde. And so they buried, of course, her in Monroe. So his lot is there in Monroe, and they all his family will be there.
And that's who?
Uncle
Fred
Fred
Thompson,
Thompson.
your
Fred
Mother's brothers.
Are they in the same cemetery where grandmother?
No, they in
yeah.
Monroe.
In
See,
the
they
old
lived in
cemetery
Monroe, and they
downtown
lost the
Monroe.
little girl, and so they had to.
They just about filled up that cemetery. That's the reason they built this one out. Started
The
out.
old city.
Out at,
Cemetery in Monroe is full. They don't have any more room there. That's why they developed this new one where Mother and Daddy are.
Yeah, I remember that,
did you all ever meet Uncle Fred?
oh yeah. We
Uncle
got some
Fred is
pictures
a
when they
character.
all, when they came, I think on Kate Thompson Day.
Right, they
He
right.
came,
When
he and
they-
his wife came.
Right.
And We got pictures of 3 of them in front of the house.
He was
What's
an
Kate
ardent
Thompson doing?
supporter of Gene
When
Talmadge.
she retired from being organist.
And his language
Oh,
sometimes
so
was
they
a
have
little
Kate Thompson there?
risque, and he had jokes he'd tell, and when he'd get ready to tell a story, grandmother would run all the
Mother
children
would say,
out.
get out, go out, you know, go. That person.
Fred's getting ready to tell a story, everybody get out, all the young folks get out.
And this was her brother.
Right.
How about that?
He wasn't at all like grandmother.
Well,
That's how-
why didn't she want you to tell the story?
Cause his
Some of them
stories
were a little
weren't
risque.
bad,
She
they were a
didn't think
little
her
on the
children should
risque
share.
side.
They were
also.
R-rated stories.
Right, right.
Not necessarily
Well,
R-rated
they-
today,
I
but
don't
R-rated.
really bother
No,
anybody.
when, with the Kate Williams Day,
Was he
that was
Presbyterian?
a great day.
Well, was he a
Presbyterian?
They
He's a
had a
Baptist.
special day for Mother when she retired.
No, he was a
All-
Methodist, I think.
And they had a
Yeah,
big
he was a Methodist.
presentation at church that morning, then they had a lovely reception, and we were all down the front row, remember?
Kate
that?
Williams Day.
Kate Williams Day.
Did Fred write a book?
Yes, he did,
Yeah.
about Annie.
Animals,
have
all
tails.
animals have tails.
All
or
animals
something
have
like
tails.
I
It's a nice
thought I
little book,
remembered.
I've got it, you can read
What's it
it.
about?
About animals, it's really
This is
interesting.
nonfiction?
Monkeys and things
Money,
like
yes,
that.
real interesting.
All animals have tails.
Right.
It's pretty simple.
Right.
Tails like T-A-I-L-S or
T-A-L-S.
T-A-L-S?
It's
T-A-L-E-S.
T-A-L,
So it is
T-A-L.
fiction.
It's
Okay.
fiction, right, it's really, I have a copy, you can read it.
Well, I,
Listen,
yeah.
I'm afraid.
I thought, I
An
can't
unusual
quite
person.
remember one of the stories, I remember reading it, but
What did he do for a living?
Well,
he sold crackers and
he
was-
worked for the
was
National
in
Biscuit,
National Biscuit Company. He was-
Company for years.
Okay.
And your grandmother, I mean, your Aunt Katie here, used to call him
I
Cracker.
used to call him Cracker, cause he always gave me crackers,
Mhm.
and I called him Cracker for
Oh,
years.
Well, and he lived in, did he live in Monroe then?
No, well, they did for a period of time.
And then he moved into the
See,
Atlanta
you
area.
see his
He
wife,
moved into,
he married,
Clarkston.
his
Okay.
wife was from Monroe originally.
Seemed like he was on the city council out of Clarkston.
Yes, he was.
And that may be why his son got involved with
Right,
politics.
right,
Okay.
right.
And,
And he was a character, you know, he was a lot of fun.
yeah, he was.
And the Whiteheads, where they buried?
Well, now, Nanny,
Nanny's
of course,
mother
from
died.
Thompson, but her brother has a lot right next to
Her
her.
mother,
Charlie
Nanny.
Whitehead lot is right next to Nanny's in Social Circle.
Charlie Whitehead.
Charlie
That's
is
Nanny's
her-
dad?
Nanny's brother.
Brother.
She had a brother. She had one sister and one brother.
And what was her name?
The
Whitehead.
sister,
But what was her name? I mean, I've
Bessie.
always heard her as Nanny,
Bessie. Oh, Nanny's name was
Leela
Leela.
Whitehead.
but
Leela
Leela
Whitehead.
Whitehead Thompson?
No. Yeah, she
Yeah,
married
Thompson.
Thompson.
She married
Leela
Thompson, but
Whitehead
she had, on that name, she just had one name, Leela. Dr. Long gave her that name.
But where her mother and father buried?
Now, you've got me, I guess up in,
Gainesville.
up
She
in,
was from Gainesville?
she lived there as a girl, but she was born in Jackson County, and it may be in Jackson County somewhere. Mother could tell you that, and I may have it down somewhere.
But she moved to Social Circle.
Yeah, she lived in Social
But
Circle,
I
and he
think
went
they're
in
in
business
Gainesville
there.
because I
But it-
remember years ago, I was over at a barbecue over at Oxford, and there was, and some alumnus of Emory came there, and he was from Gainesville, and we were talking, and he said, he was a lawyer, and he said, I was checking the title of there and ran across, in the description said the lot was bound on Thompson, on the alley, named Thompson's Alley.
Right,
And that was,
Thompson's family,
that's your folks' is funny, he was talking to you.
talking to me.
How about that? Where's the cemetery at in Social? When you go into
You know,
town from
if
here,
you go,
it's
it's
on the
right
left.
behind the
It's right
Methodist
behind
church.
that church, as
On
you
the
go
left-hand
across
side.
the bridge,
Okay.
right easy to get over there.
Okay. I think grandmother, maybe my mama took us down there one time with grandmother
I
for
expect so.
some reason.
We go through that, kid.
Oh, I go by there, I went by there the other day.
What was granddaddy's mother's name?
Martha Mason,
Mason. Their
Oh.
Masons are buried in Columbus.
right, Columbus, right.
Even kissing Billy Williams.
Yeah.
Were you
he's-
married down
Yeah, he's
You
been
know, when
there.
our son Mason was born,
I think you,
Catherine was real groggy coming out right after and I told her, and she said, what?
He
what
told me
is
I
it?"
have
I
another
said, you got
boy.
a little boy, and she said, but little girls are sweet too, and I said, yes, but you got a little boy, we're gonna name him Mason Williams. I thought we were gonna name him Kissing Billy Williams.
I don't remember that, he
But that's what-
declares I said
Kissing
it.
Billy Williams Stevenson is what she wanted to name
Oh,
him.
God.
Well, now, what was it about him, about his life? Did he have did he get orphaned earlier or kissing Billy?
I don't, let me see, cause he is a young man and went right into the war, you know.
He's the one that was with the railroad.
He was one.
Right, I know, but it seemed like Mother told me something about, that he had, his parents died earlier or something
Well,
like that.
one of them I know did, but I'm not sure about the
He
other.
was on his own in the
Right,
early
he was
80s.
for a while, and he was born in, as I said, in Stratton County, and then went to Columbus, and that's when he met, I don't know whether he was, or rather, I'm not sure how he met her, because all I know is that after the war, you know, as I said, he was pulled and put into the railroad off the battle. He'd been in the war for about 2 years, and then still in the army, but started working with the railroad part. And then went with the Central Georgia after the war, went stuck with the railroad, and that's, you know, he had done that, and that's what he decided to stick with and did. And I believe you were on the phone when I was telling Wilder that did you hear me say when he was buried, we, you know, took him, went to Atlanta and then got on the train, Central Georgia train, and they put these big, with the flags flying, showing that one of their dignitaries was on the train, and we took his body. I was so impressed with that. I was just, of course, I was 17 years old, but I just remember that, and they were also the railroad.
In the president's car.
Rode in this special car, you know, and rode down there. They were real nice for Central Georgia.
That was from Atlanta to Columbus?
I've never ridden on a train before.
Never?
Never ridden on a train before.
Someday, Kay.
Except, you know, like at Six Flags or the time
When
we
you
went to
can go to
Chattanooga.
Atlanta now, and Steve Pope at the Capitol, when they run a train excursion around Atlanta and also goes out to Stone Mountain Park. In this case, they run take a trip up in the mountains sometimes.
Listen, you invited us for lunch, and we've spent the day. Didn't it? It's terrible.
Oh,
We
no,
were-
we didn't really enjoy it.
I was drinking coffee in there.
And I've been yakking away. They don't
They
be
wanted,
tired
they tried to
of
want to know if you wanted any coffee. I said, no, I said, she can't
I don't
drink
ever drink. I can't have caffeine.
it. Donna
Keeps
couldn't
me awake.
imagine anybody drinking coffee without either milk or sugar or sweetener of some sort.
Oh,
Generally, it's more, we drink our milk with a little coffee is what it is.
oh,
I take that up to Daddy. Daddy takes 2 milks and 15 sugars.
Let me tell you another thing your grandmother Kate did all of our lives that we remember. And of course,
You
she
got that
said that
thing
we all
called
had
Catherine.
cooperated. She couldn't have.
According to you.
But
The point is, Kathy, she's the one that's talking.
what happened?
It's got both of you as well.
Oh, it is.
Oh, it does.
Your grandmother Kate did this real wonderful service all over Walton County. The Almond funeral home there in
It was right up the street from.
you know, right, it was
I
down
remember
right up the
that. Right
street.
on Main
Broad
Street,
Street,
Walton
right there
County.
where Walton.
Well, they would call on your grandmother, our mother, all the time we were growing up. Mother did this to play. See, in those days they have the funerals would be all scattered all around. They didn't have
country
places. They did not have the places in funeral homes then to have funerals. They later have done. I mean, they have them now and they have had for in recent years, but they did not then. And a lot of the funerals would be in little churches all over Walton County. And they would call Mother and ask her if she would play.
And they
Mother,
call on Sarah Arnold
and
from
Sarah
across the street to sing.
Miss Arnold, you know, had that beautiful voice. And there's no telling how many times my mother and Sarah Arnold would leave, say, on a busy afternoon. I've seen Mother have to do it on Christmas afternoon one time. I can remember that. And they left and would go, and Mother said she could write a book on the different kind of pianos she's played on in all these little churches all around, you know, playing for funerals. That's something. And the Almonds, they appreciated it, so they were always so sweet and good to Mother. Sent her things and on birthdays and things like that, because she never would take any pay for it. She just would.
Then they used to go out to the J County Prison out there at the edge of town and have services on Sunday afternoon or something, you know. And they were getting ready to go out there one Sunday afternoon, and Sarah was getting up all these religious tracts and magazines to take out there with them. And little Sarah said, "Where you going, Mother?" And she said, "I'm going out to the jail prison and take these thing for them to read. She said, don't you know old folks ain't got time to read, they're so busy knowing their way out there.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, but you know, grandmother used to, one of the main things she always impressed upon me was to say get instead of
Right,
get.
absolutely.
You know, I always still second guess myself if I hear myself
Well, let me
say
tell you
get.
what I did once. When Mason was in junior high and high school, I used to substitute for a good bit over in junior high and high school as a substitute teacher. And one day I was, forgotten what teacher I was substituting for this day, but it was an English class. And fine, we'd started the class and I'd heard a number of remarks, so finally I closed my book and I said, now listen, we're going to leave this lesson alone right now. And I said, now we're going to have a session and we're going to learn how to spell and pronounce the word get. And honey, we had a session on that. I made them all pronounce it, went over the whole class. I said, pronounce the word, it is not get, it's get. G-E-T, get,
I bet they
Oh, I know they never forgot that, but I was so tired of hearing all this get business that I just had to feel it.
I just remember we'd always just look at grandmother. Grandmother said, the word is get.
Right.
We'd say, yes ma'am, get. She'd say, no, the word is get. We'd say, yes ma'am, get. To us, we were saying what we were saying.
And listen, my mother would be horrified now to see the things that are said on TV. She would
Oh, now I remember.
Guts was one word she couldn't stand.
But you know what?
And the words that they use for the fanning now, they just come right out and say everything. Nobody thinks
she would
anything
be
about
horrified.
it.
What you see, she would just,
But I was telling the story one time in her presence, and I didn't want to offend her. And so I got to a certain part, and I said that they threw up. And Grandma says, oh my goodness, that's awful. I said, well, Grandma, what would you rather be saying, vomit? She said, yes. I thought I was using the better word, but she let me know real fast that was not the right term.
About sometime this fall, our grandson and Martin spent the weekend with us, and it was Sunday, and he didn't want to go to Sunday school. In fact, he wasn't going to Sunday school. He wouldn't go, but he would go to church, but he didn't want to go.
you don't like
But
those strange
he
things.
sat there between, Ms. Exley was sitting over here, and Dr. Exley there, and Martin was between me and Ms. Exley. And he stood the service as long as he could. I think I'm gonna throw up. Well, you can imagine, I didn't let him sit there.
No, I said I didn't know whether he really was or making it up or what.
So we went out.
I was in the choir and I saw him go out.
He sat on the crib a little while, and then he said, well, I'll go back in there. He never did throw up, but I'm still wondering whether he was playing a trick on his grandfather. But I wasn't gonna take a chance on it.
When they came back in, they went up in the balcony and sat up there to finish the service.
So he said, I think I'm gonna throw up. Well, magic wood.
Oh my
It's a
goodness.
wise thing to do.
Right.
Got a lot on the ball. It's like Lily Gladys and her breakfast this morning. She got in the car and she had some candy. They called Skittles. And she wanted to know if she could have some Skittles, and Mother told her no, that she didn't have any. I mean, Lane told her she couldn't because she didn't eat any breakfast. She said, I brought a banana for you to eat. So she handed the banana back. Lily Gladys took, I think, one bite, maybe two.
No, she ate half of it.
Did she eat half of it?
Mhm.
And all of a sudden she said, I got a sore throat. I got this stomach ache. And I kind of looked back down and I said, you don't think you can eat that banana, huh, Lily? No, sir. I said, how about some Skittles? Can you handle some Skittles? Yes, sir, I can handle some.
Always. Always.
That's her latest thing, that she comes up, she gets a sore throat,
Or stomach ache.
or stomach ache, or sometimes both.
At the table, she goes, she does not like what we eat, so she goes, Mama, I don't feel good. My stomach hurts. Terrible.
Right.
We go, yeah, right, Leila.
Well, your mother, when she was little, Leela had been so sick when she was a year old. I know you probably mother,
You all don't know about
y'all don't know about that, but she was. When she was a year old, she was very ill, sick for a long time. She was in Atlanta under Dr. Bonner, the famous pediatrician at that time in Atlanta.
What'd she have?
I never had, well, she just had a number of things, and I I don't know what all, but then from that on, you know.
But she was staying with,
But we were staying at that time, Dr. Bond's house was on, what's the first street, Piedmont or Jupiter?
say.
Anyway, the Hickey home, Aunt Bessie Hickey and Jack Hickey's family home was on Piedmont Avenue, and the Dr. Bond's house was on Jupiter. They were streets right
Back
next.
to
Their
back.
houses were back to back. So they kept Leela stayed. Mother went up and stayed with Leela at the Hickey's home, so Dr. Bond could see Leela every day. And
That's when they made house calls.
that's when doctors made house calls. And so that's why all the Hickeys always was just loved your mama, because she was there as a little one, you know, a number of weeks she was there. Because I know 6 weeks she was up there because Daddy was at home with Mason, and then we would go up on weekends to see them, you know.
Daddy makes house calls. They come to his house.
Right.
And Daddy is
Right.
them there.
But anyway, what was I? This is what I don't like about this age. I was getting ready to tell you something. What was it?
She was sick for a long time.
Yeah, she was sick for a long time. But there was something else. And so for a long time after that, Leela's mother had a struggle trying to get Leela to eat the right things. And she would eat the funny, of course, Mason and I, at that age, of course, see, Leela was, she was a year old, and I was 6, I was 7 years old, and Mason was 5. So we were gobbling up everything, you know, we were pretty good eaters. But mother, they were having trouble with Leela because following that illness and everything. And I remember one thing she liked and would eat, we could not believe, beets of all things. Your mother at that liked beets. And it was the funniest thing. Mother, and we ended up having beets in there every day because Leela would eat some beets, you know. But Mother was having a struggle with your mama at that time, trying to get her to eat right.
And then she struggled the rest of her life
Right.
with food because she loves sweets.
Yeah.
Woo!
Your mom? Nanny?
Nanny, yes. Right, she had a sweet tooth like you.
Let me tell you, your nanny, Leela, she was the sweetest, finest person.
Ooh,
Just like
I
her
mean,
sister.
she was a peach. You know what I miss more than anything is, you know, those years toward the end when she didn't do a lot of driving, you know, with her eye problem. She would call us, you know, I think your daddy told her to use the phone any way she wanted to since she couldn't drive and go places as much. So nearly every other day she would call us, and she would, you know, she and Don were big buddies, and she would call us before 8:30 in the morning, before she thought he would be leaving, and I'd pick up the phone, and this voice would say, "Hi, what you doing?" You know how I long to hear that voice say, "Hi, what you doing?" Just in that way.
Sounds like Aunt Lee.
Right. Thank you. I think that's a compliment. But anyway, I can hear that right now. Hi, what you doing? And we tell them
And I'm so glad we took that trip to England and stuff.
I went to England.
See, that was just 6 months before she died.
That's right.
That was in
We
June.
have, she brought
Got
those
a
little,
whole slide.
those little,
She took a slides all
1979
over the.
Jubilee things.
Right.
With the Prince and
Right.
Queen or whatever it is.
We had such a good time.
She had, everybody loved her. Everybody.
And you
I
never,
think I've told you that story. I know I told Lee this, and if I've told you, you stop me. But there was the nicest couple on our tour. That was a grand bunch of people. And there were about, 44 of us on that bus.
Who was it, what kind of tour was it?
Caravan.
Caravan tour, okay.
Great tours. I highly recommend it. If you ever want to take a trip to Europe, you can't do any better than Caravan. They're terrific. But anyway, there were about 44 of us on that trip. And this couple was from Washington State. Oh, I guess, well, they had 2 sons, and one was already out of college and one was still in college, so that was about how old they were. And we had been with them a number of times, you know, like you are with a lot of, what they do in Caravan, you rotate, you move your seat back every morning, you're on a different seat, and that way you get to know everybody pretty well, you know, on the tour. But anyway, the night before we were leaving London, they have a big farewell dinner the night before you're coming home. And we were in the hotel in London, and because we were flying home from London. And after the dinner, we were all saying goodbye. We were all going different planes and tours leaving different ways the next morning. And this, let me see, what were their names? Not Floyd, something like that. Lloyd or Floyd, I believe. And she came over to me and she said, everybody called me Katie because your mother called me Katie, see? So they all called me Katie, and she came over and said, Katie, I said, come over here, I want to tell you something. And she said, I don't want Leela to hear this, I want to just tell you something. So she called me aside. This was just before we were all saying goodbye to everybody. And she said, I just want to tell you something, that we have looked forward, my husband and I, have saved and looked forward to this trip for many years. We just have planned it and thought about it a long time. And it has been everything we thought it would be. We've been so pleased with Caravans too and everything about it. And all these nice people we've been associated with. But she said, I just want you to know that I know I'll remember all these things, but it's something, there's one thing, one person that I will never forget as long as I live. And she said, I consider it a privilege to have met and known your sister. She said, I just admire her so much, and I want to tell you that, and to tell you that with all these things we have seen and done, I'll never forget your sister as long as I live. I just thought that was the sweetest thing. Right.
That's special.
Let me get it. Or it's right behind it's gone.
I tell you, she thoroughly enjoyed that. She enjoyed all those trips because, you know.
Yeah, you remember when we went up to New England, to Grizz in New England together. We had such a good time. When she threw the tea in the Boston, did the Boston Tea Party.
Yeah.
She threw tea in the
Yeah, you go out that way, that happens, you know, they let you get out and throw tea in the house. Leela threw tea in the house. We had a lot of fun.
She was going to do it if there was a way to get to it and get it done. But
We had a good time.
she loved to travel. She loved to get and go.
Did y'all go to with Hawaii?
Y'all
go to?
No,
with her
We
to
didn't go,
Hawaii.
no, we didn't go to
That was
Hawaii.
another. She and Daddy went
She
on another
and
trip.
Granddaddy went over there, right.
How many places did they go to?
Daddy didn't leave town much. That was
He
a rare
did, she
occasion.
took 2 or 3 good trips with us.
So when she did take trips, they went and did big things.
Because he didn't go much, but he just says, whenever you find something to go, you go.
And you know, there was the nicest young bachelor named Charles on that tour in England. And he was very fond of, he was so cute. Everybody loved Leela, but he was so cute. He would, a lot of times she would be taking pictures from the bus, you know, right along it. And maybe if he'd be on the other side, he said, Miss Smith, hand me your camera. I'll take it on this, take this on this side for you. And he'd grab a picture over there. And one time, I've forgotten where it was, whether it was in, whereabouts, because, you know, that trip, we went all up into the Highlands, Scotland, all up to Edinburgh, and all up into the Highlands, and down the Lake Country, and all the way down to Plymouth. You know, we really toured England. And one time at one hotel, we just had hysterics. They put Leela's baggage in Charles's room by mistake. You know, we requested of Caravan ahead of time. Donald wrote them ahead of time and told that she would be traveling with us, and that she was my sister, and that if possible, to have her room placed next to go to ours, which they did all the time. They were real careful about it. But this time, some way, they made a mistake and put her baggage. The man took her baggage into Charles's room, and everybody got a big line down. Like we had to go up and get Leela's baggage out of Charles's room upstairs.
Your pa didn't go on that trip?
We get him off the country.
See,
Now,
that
he's
trip,
never been out of country but one time.
We were
That was
gone
for
about 2.5 weeks on that trip.
He couldn't stay.
And when it was the New England trip? That was the year before?
That was, well, let's see, Claire was about 2 years old, and she's now 15. So, that would be what, 13 years
I
old.
know how many steps
She
going on
did
there.
11 years.
So it was about 2 years
It was about a year or two before.
before we went to England.
I mean, there wasn't much time, because I remember, both times. But she couldn't get him to, that was unusual. I was surprised that he went to Hawaii.
Well, it was good that they had that, right?
He doesn't even know how to even now. Like I said, if he could hold up in the house,
I know.
Just
That's
right there.
All he did.
that's all he, because he doesn't care a thing more about traveling. If he's gone, he'll say, they're going to be gone for a week, and after about 3 days, he'll be back in town. He's going to tell you he's back, but he's back. And because he never has been one to travel. He just doesn't. I reckon that trip we took to New York in 1959 cured him forever.
We had all of you there together, right?
He decided right then that,
We're going to have to go. Oh, I said, we're going to have to go.
over now.
That's how I can tell
30 years in.
Y'all asleep, right?
You can.
This sure has been fun.
Oh,
Y'all are.
Jordan's mother.
You ever want some water?
No, I'm fine. I'm gonna get home, don't worry. This old boy said,
Listen, I would have needed some a long time ago. You've been
Now,
great.
if you find anything at home that's got any information that we've missed,
all right. I'll have to go back to
Tape yourself and send it to me.
generation back. And listen,
Yeah.
you taught me something, but I'm gonna do this, get this down in a thing for my own.
We'll just make you fast.
Listen, we finally, have gotten a VCR, and we've looked, the tape you made of Greer's speech, we listened to it all over again, and that was fun. And then when you did when Don got there walling out to the college, he was so good too.
Oh, I was just glad.
Yeah, I
How
still
much
go.
I just appreciated it all over again. It felt like going to the telephone right then and saying, George, thank you
Oh,
again.
good gracious. Well, special.
Oh, well,
All animals have tails.
I bring the book
Grand
over,
times.
and your children would enjoy it.
I think I enjoyed getting it. I think I'll look for a copy of it too. These
Got
old books.
something about this monkey that takes a baby up in a tree or something.
A monkey and
A
what?
monkey slapped this baby and took it up in a tree and set it. I just remember
Did he make all this up himself?
I had heard this story before, but it wasn't a real. It was a little different, and he adopted it, adapted it to
Well, did the Cherokee Publishing Company print that one? Or?
No, I don't know who did that. That was a long time ago.
What about, is Mr. Wilford still around?
No, he's in Atlanta somewhere. He sold the Cherokee Publishing Company. That's not his company anymore.
Do they still sell books out of that little office up there?
I don't think so. I think Cherokee's up in Marietta now.
Okay. Because they had a lot of local books there that would be interesting.
That's
Look
right. He republished Georgia Scenes by Judge Longstreet from over at Enron. And he did a collection of John Daniel Whitehead Hickey's poems
And that's the book that you had. I remember seeing that.
got several Hickey's books. He got that book too.
And that was Nanny's brother, right?
He was Nanny's brother's child.
Okay. So he was grandmama's cousin and
First
Katie,
cousin, grandmother's first cousin.
and Katie's second cousin. Okay. It's tough for me to remember all this stuff.
I know what it is, George. I don't hope to do it.
Well, it's certainly interesting to look
It
at.
may confuse you more than anything else because it's hard to remember things and tell them in a perfect sequence unless you've got it written down and you go down. If you just think from memory, you'll jump all around. Grandmother. She gives me an illustration about their grandmother where they've done a wreck on the Atlanta highway between Monroe and Atlanta. And it was a head-on collision, and I said, Grandmother, I said, was the car trying to pass another? And she started telling me about it, and about the folks that were in it, how they had some kin folks out at the University of Texas, out in Texas, and all about these folks, and finally your grandpa said, but Kate, all he asked her was trying to pass another. But I thought he would be interested in knowing all these details about the people that were involved.
How about that?
But that was just typical of grandmother.
How about
She was just a wonderful person.
Mm-hmm.
And you could tease her and laugh at her, but it didn't bother her at all. She was still the same person.
Mm-hmm. She's something else. Well, both of them were, weren't they?
Yes, and your granddaddy was a remarkable person. And he never did make any money, a whole lot of money, but he did a lot more than that. There's a lot of folks who made money and didn't amount to anything really, and didn't leave any impression on the community in which they lived or grew up. They took things out of it, but he put things in it. He did good for the whole community.
That's important, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Maybe that's a goal I ought to find out. We're talking about trying to get some new docs in town. And you always talk to them about their personal goals and about keeping up in medical education. what they want to do and this and that, but you know, their philosophy about their
If they're just in it for the
contributions
money
to
they
the
gonna
community.
make, that's not,
That's important to know.
yes, it is. You remember when you were talking to Dr. Calloway about coming here, and he told you that, didn't think there was room for another more doctor. You remember telling me?
Oh, the Dr. Tanner told me that.
Dr. Thomas. I was thinking you said Dr. Calloway. But anyway, just think how many doctors have come into California since that time.
That's right. And we're all doing well, and we're hurting now. We need, we could stand another 5 primary care doctors right now.
It's just amazing.
How about that?
I'm just
And
feeling.
this thing automatically focuses.
Yes, sir. It's got an automatic
I
focus on
see
it.
that thing going, turning around.
This is high as it'll go.
You turn this thing right here, and that loosens it up, and you can go up and down with it.
Oh, okay. Just to tighten it.
You have to tighten it, and it'll stay.
We were, this other day, we were looking at the tapes you gave us of Grill's speech and the one of mine did, when they gave me that award over at Oxford, and it was just so good. And I appreciate it.
We've had a lot of fun with this camera. It's,
I know you have.
I know. I love playing with it.
especially, you know, we go back and look at the old pictures of when these kids were a lot smaller. I think we got it in
It's so
1980.
much better than when folks used to do 8 millimeter and 16 millimeter. The first thing, most of them didn't have any sound in it.
That's right.
And all your daddy took all these pictures over at grandmother's, and at every occasion, you remember taking them, of everybody walking out the front door. And then he tied them all together, and we just kept walking out the front door and walking out the front door. And everybody got a little bit bigger and a little bit older, but we kept walking out. Nobody walked back in. Everybody was always going
Make
out.
a speech, Catherine. That thing's still on.
That's right. It sure is.
Voila.
We need to get some copies of those movies. Have you seen those in a while?
No.
We'll have to dig them.
You,
We'll
you
have
like
to
it?
Have you seen them?
I've seen a few of them. I didn't see the
If
ones
you had
where
them, you
it was
had to
just
save those to tape though.
No, sir, I did Aunt Sally's that way. I made some copies of all of Aunt Sally's movies, and I made extras for Dad.
Lee's getting one. Daddy
Okay.
one for Aunt Lee.
He did?
Don't let the camera
Well,
drop.
that's good.
She never got a copy. She didn't even know there were.
Is that right?
She didn't even know Daddy had it.
Well, I need to dig up a copy for myself. I don't even think I kept a copy for myself. I gave one to Dad and didn't keep one for myself.
Because you knew him as
Here.
Yeah, when some of the ones when you were a little boy, when you're on the screen, we can hear Aunt Donna sitting there laughing when you're sitting there going,
No. Oh, I know I can see it.
Daddy said your tongue was too big for your mouth.
She took the job that I,
He did.
Hey, Linda.
I like to remember that.
and I recommended her to Mr. Robert Humphrey.
Wait, move. Move, Katie. Let me do it.
Especially Sally.
Katie. Okay, what's that?
She'd
Look
get
out.
close and she'd turn around like this. And then she'd change.
Let me do it.
Fashion show.
Jim, how about shutting the door for me?
Hey.
Now you're recording this down there
That's right.
instead of up in here.
That's right.
Wait.
This one's a
Look
lot
in the
older.
camera. Wait,
Yeah,
I'm
it
saying
is.
something. Look in the
So
camera.
with this one being an older camera, you have to lug this around. But the new ones
Camera close.
have it in right there,
That's what I thought.
and it's a lot nicer.
Come up.
Yeah,
Come
you have
on.
a camera?
No, we don't have a camera.
Come closer.
All our children are grown, grandchildren, we don't need a camera.
You mash that little button that makes it come closer.
I thought about buying one years ago, but
Can't say
they were so
anything.
expensive when I thought about it. They were about $2,000.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're down about $800 or $900.
That's right.
Hello there.
But this one
I'm
won't
getting a
work.
picture of your scar.
Like this part, see?
Uh-huh.
And so we had to, and that's about what it costs, $1,000 for the
Katie,
VCR
see.
and around $900 for the camera.
Look in the
But,
camera.
Now you get the whole thing.
I'm doing his shirt.
You can get the whole camera
Wait.
with everything built in, but then if you want a VCR, you have to
look
buy
at
an
the
extra one. But they're not
camera.
that expensive, $300 or $400 at the most. So
On the camera.
But you have to have that to show it, you mean?
that's right.
There it goes. Wait! Look
Okay.
at the camera. I can't see.
You can't see me?
There.
Did you know Uncle Donald can do backwards flips off the diving board in the pool? And forwards flips?
I can do a
How old are
forward
you,
flip.
78?
78.
78. How about that?
78's not very old. How old are you?
9.
Oh, you're older than I am.
Uh-uh.
I'm just 8.
Let me get your daddy. Whoops, there's the window. Oh gosh. There's your daddy. Look in the camera.
Okay, Katie, you're 11 years old now. You have to take on a lot of responsibility as an 11-year-old child.
Yeah.
I want you to wash the dishes and clean up the house this week.
Forget it.
Mother and Dad are going to go out on the town.
Forget it.
Right.
How about $50? I'll take it.
$50 we'll pay you when you're 18.
Okay.
Correct. Okay.
Lila, go out in front of the camera. I can get Lila.
Come over here now.
Lila, go out in front of the camera.
Come over here. Sit right here.
Hey, Lila. How you doing? All right, that's good.
And
That's
now
good.
we have Miss Lila Gladys Smith in her purple outfit.
Yay! Yay! Yay, Lila! Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Miss Lisa.
Hi. Now, y'all, move the camera. Come on, now. It's my turn. Now. Hello, ladies. Say something to the camera. Catherine, come on, fix your face. Oh my God. Do it again, Lila. Get Lila Gladys. Get Lila Gladys. Lila? Do it, Lila. Wait, let me get you. Keep the way you are. Okay, wait. Wait. Do it.
You can see her underwear.
Wait, put it down some more. Okay. That's all. Split better and cartwheel. And
Why don't you show us some?
yes, why don't you show us? Okay. See this? Very good.
Okay, stay back down.
Are you backing it up?
Yes.
Can you roll out and spin like this? Can you roll your hand out? Like that? Very good.
Absolutely bogus, dude.
Okay, so let's show us the cartwheel. Very good. Round off. Do a cartwheel like this. I know. It's very
Do it
good.
again,
All right,
Layla.
sit down.
Do it again, Miss
No. Layla, Alice, can I hold on your blood call? No, you're fixing to be in Cincinnati. Please sit in that blue chair. Over there. Alright, our next guest for today is Miss Lila Gladys Smith. You gotta sit in the chair. That one. Now what have you learned about your suits at home? Your suits. Your clothes, Lila. What kind of clothes do you have? Would you like to model this one? Just go out there and model it. How long do you like cleaning out?
Okay.
Please
Show us your split. Show us your split.
You can't do one.
Oh, okay.
Show us the carpet.
Do something that you know how to do. What are you doing?
No, I'm going.
Oh, okay. Somersault. What?
Thank you, Miss Lila Gladys. Your turn to go.
No, it's not. No, it's not. Still, you got